as a musician, it's hurtful that it's being so commodified as that it's just being looped in with this is content. No, it's not content. This is something that should be paid for. We look at what Best Nights VC does as investing in the supply chain of nightlife. We're trying to create community value, connecting all of nightlife's potential. And I think music serves as one of these. Nightlife just in itself it's a strategic asset. It's a strategic asset to any city. This whole idea about bringing people together, this is something that music actually does.
Sponsored by Allfeet, decentralized blockchain solutions for the music industry. Produced by Amplitude Ventures Consulting, partners in early stage music tech. I talked with Andrea Rosen, an investor and music expert at Best Nights VC. We talked about using music to drive culture and community. From nightlife innovation to scaling music startups, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Sound Connections podcast. Today I have a friend on the podcast. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We had a really great time at Slosh Music, which was the first music version of Slosh this year. And we were a part of a really interesting music technology part of Slosh. You work at a really interesting company called Best Nights VC. So you're a venture capital firm, and I'll have you introduce it and yourself. So for the people who don't know who you are, who are you and what do you do?
So hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Rosen. I am the portfolio manager at Best Nights VC, which is Jägermeister's corporate venture arm. We invest in the future of nightlife and culture and social interactions. But also, I've been a DJ for the last 20 years. I'm also a producer. So I live and breathe music, nightlife, and all things community and culture.
Mm. And I think what's really interesting about your profile, also be part of sort of a VC setup, is your very practical hands-on experience with music. I love the guests I have on the podcast who are part of the Investor series have been tangent to music for many years or from the admin side. And I think we'll use the opportunity today to talk about music from a quite domain expertise side. With tangent to VC capital and what works, what doesn't work, and how does your portfolio look like, and all that kind of stuff. So, but before we get into that, you have a really interesting story yourself. Could you just walk us through your career until now? Like, what's been the journey towards Best Night?
I love how you say by interesting, you mean completely weird offbeat trajectory, which I think confuses a lot of people. But I started I started my career when I was in Tel Aviv. So in Tel Aviv is basically like a startup within itself. You don't have this formal European training of saying, hey, we go to business school or we do this or we do that. It was more, okay, I needed a job and I found someone who hired me because they're like, you seem really cool. You can do community management. And then it just sort of spiraled from there. So I kind of got into startups by accident, which I think a lot of people find very, very strange, especially since moving to Europe. But that's just
Yeah.
kind of how it went back then. And so I was joining a bunch of startups early on, learning the ropes that way. And one of the startups that I joined in the founding team called Eat With. This was back at the sort of the height of the sharing economy in 2013. So Airbnb was just lifting off and being really cool. And so was Uber. And then Eat With was sort of your Uber or your Airbnb for social dining experiences. And besides the fact that I got to eat a lot of really good food, I also learned a lot about what it meant to open up global markets, to scale a very, very small startup, and also what it meant to raise a Series A, and eventually what it meant to exit. So it exited in 2017. And
Mm.
since then, yeah, I've been in the startup and innovation world, joining different types of startups, different sectors, learning the ropes as I go along. But music,
Mm.
of course, is always my heart and soul.
And describe your heart and soul there with music. Like you've been DJing for 20 years. How does that look like for you?
Now or back then?
Well, yeah, back then and now.
Okay. So, I mean, how it kind of started, I've been collecting records since I could talk. My father was a record collector. Every room in the house was filled with records pretty much. So this is something I grew up with. And then my cousins were wedding and bar mitzvah DJs. So they were always, fooling around with the turntables and the records in the basement, and it never occurred to me that I could be a DJ. It was just not something girls did back then, or at least not, in my world, so it was just always something that I played around with, but I was still so into the music, and I had older, DJ friends, guy friends that were like, "Hey, you have really good taste. You should learn this." And so, they were teaching me the ropes. I was getting good gigs in really good clubs back in Tel Aviv, and, yeah, it just sort of spiraled from there. I think professionally it started, more in, early, yeah, like around 2000, 2008. But I mean, I've been playing around with vinyl since way before that, and,
Mm,
you kinda think as you get older, "Oh, maybe this is it. Maybe it's done," but no, I think I'm only just getting started now. So
amazing.
it's really exciting.
And I think what's really interesting is looking at today's conversation from the love of music, but then also separated that from the investment potential of music. Because of what I would love to talk to you today is about investment. It's about how you look at the music industry in particular, how we look at specific companies. What are you guys looking for at Best Nights? But also, if you look outside the scope of Best Nights, like what are general commentaries about music? Um, I think we had a really interesting conversation, and I made a statement before our call, and I said I wouldn't put it on the podcast, but I'm gonna do it anyways. We talked about, being exposed to the number of startups out there, and I feel like I'm pretty well informed about what happens, but what I've been sort of exposed to the last couple of months is, I'm a part of these networks, also Music Tech Europe Academy, where I'm a mentor, where there's a lot of startups being, selected and presented, and I see more and more that most of the startups out there, I don't know, and I know hundreds of startups. So, um, so first of all, it's really interesting to see there must be a lot more startups than I first assumed when I really went deeply into this space. But then the actual comment I made, is what I also see is in general, I believe that the quality I see of startups and founder teams seems to be stronger outside of the music communities. And what do I mean by music communities? Uh, the tech constellations in the countries, the conferences, all that kind of stuff. And not to say that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a really interesting observation. But I think the music industry seems quite fragmented when it comes to the startup environment, and that might also have its ripple effects. I don't know why I said that. I just wanted to have a starting point in the
You
conversation, talking about the potential of music startups. Is this something you see as well, or what's your angle?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, we're dealing with a industry that's playing catch up. I think, there's when it comes to the tech startups and things like this, you're dealing with a lot of traditional founders in many ways that were going after, big tech that had solutions to, let's call them, for lack of a better word, real life problems, not nice to have, even though I think music is essential, that they were trying to solve. And so there was just sort of a different way of dealing with things. And as music tech has started to sort of build into this more mature industry, we're still further behind than when it comes to other traditional
Mm.
industries. There, we're still just a bunch of kids playing drums or with vinyls that are trying to figure out our business models. And um, for I guess for lack of better explanation around that, and something I saw a lot when I was sort of in the beginning of doing a lot of climate tech, because I also worked in this sector for a bit, is that at the very beginning of climate tech, or a lot of tech that has social good or things like this, a lot of the ideas around it at the beginning were sort of like, you have to measure it differently than you measure other um, other companies, because they have very different metrics, they have different things. And to an extent, I agree with that, but at the same time, it's still an entrepreneurial space, and any startup that's not thinking economically, at least long term, um, even if the short term is not, but at least long term is not thinking economically, is not going to survive, because it's not. Um, we're not looking at nonprofits here, and no nonprofit is going to be a VC case. So I think it's the same when it comes to music. And what I see a lot of times is that, while I'm very interested in non-traditional founders, or people that have never, been founders before, they still have to learn the right way to pitch their company.
Mhm.
And, and I don't mean this from the traditional, okay, you have to pitch in 30 seconds, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. But, you and I, we go to so many different conferences and we meet a lot of people. And how many times after 5 seconds are you either completely don't understand what the person's saying, or you're really bored by it because they don't really know how to shape what they're
Mm,
saying. And um,
really.
this is why I like what we're doing at Best Nights VC, because there's so many different angles to it. Music is the catalyst, but it's not the entire thing of what we invest
Mm,
in. And we are looking for founders that in many ways know how to tell the story. They know how to really build that narrative around the community aspect of what it means to bring people together in real life.
mm. You said a lot of interesting things there, but
Right.
I'm gonna just point out two things. I'm gonna start with the first one. Um, there, sorry, what you just said. You said real life problems. That music. Well, you basically said the music isn't real life problems, which I totally agree with. But could you dissect that from me, at least just from an investor standpoint and the potential? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I only say this just because I've worked in so many different sectors. So, for instance, we were dealing with, in, let's say, the sharing economy. People were looking for new business models and new ways to get around by car, or to get around instead of hotels. Or, for instance, when I was working um, as a partner of Volkswagen and Bayer. So we were looking for a lot of, different mobility tech, energy tech, health tech, things like this that were solving sort of your everyday real world problems. And it's not that music doesn't have its problems, because it does, but it's very different level. And I think that the way uh, m- music entrepreneurs have to learn how to describe these problems, they have to actually be problems. And so I
Mm,
think a lot of what we see is solutions for problems that don't exist. And this is
mm,
also um, something that we, as investors, I mean, you see this in every industry, but I feel like I see this more with
mm,
music. So seeing less solutions for problems that don't exist, and more thinking about what actually are the problems. And I think what's interesting is, now that the industry is starting to mature just a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more, the problems are starting to become very obvious, right? So
mm,
um, we know that there's a lot of problems when it comes to music rights, licensing, ownership. We know that there are issues in general with how to your ethics around how music is made or distributed. We know that there are issues with monetization. So that there's the problems are becoming way more scalable and obvious, which should make for more interesting entrepreneurs in the space.
mm.
Should.
Yeah. You also said something really interesting, which is you said music as a catalyst, and you also met my business partner Taj, who doesn't come from music, and most of Slush, he talked about the concept of no one is paying for music. And what he meant by that is obviously someone is paying for music is we were sitting at a cafe with a producer friend of mine from Finland, who I believe is one of Europe's best producers. But he is struggling, well, not struggling to make a living. He's making a living, but like he should be doing much better than he does. And we
Mhm.
talked about music instead. And Tasi said, I'm drinking this coffee. I paid for this coffee. The person who made the bean in Ethiopia planted a seed with a very clear expectation of getting paid right away. So I, as an end consumer, directly purchase this coffee that's made from that bean, and there's a very clear value chain. I'm not paying for the music playing in the background. Yeah, well, somebody's paying for music, sure, but me as a consumer, I'm not paying for the music. And he argued that is the fundamental difference of the economies. That there's very few places in life where people consume music where they actually pay for it.
Mhm.
And it sort of speaks to the concept of value of music and all these kind of stuff and the whole value chain. But what you said, I think, also plays off it is the music is catalyst for something. Could you again? I just put some words in your mouth, but I just wanted to give my own personal angle from it. What do you mean by that? What does music as a catalyst mean?
Yeah, I mean, we look at what Best Nights VC does as investing in the supply chain of nightlife. We're trying to create community value, connecting all of nightlife's potential with all these broader community topics. And I think music serves as one of these. Nightlife, just in itself, it's a strategic asset. It's a strategic asset to any city. And we're seeing a lot of issues right now in the UK with the nightlife scene. We're
Mm,
definitely seeing the closure of clubs here. I just played at one of Berlin's best clubs or most well-known clubs this weekend, and it was half empty. So we're dealing with
Mm.
some major issues in the nightlife scene, but it is essential to making cities competitive and even attractive for
Mm.
top talent, especially innovators. And yeah, and this whole idea about bringing people together, this is something that music actually does. And so it is of course, as a musician, it's hurtful that it's being so commodified as that it's just being looped in with this is content. No, it's not
Mm.
content. This is something that that should be paid for, that
Yeah.
is, it is developed, and this is why, it's great that there are more and more specifically music tech investors, because I think that you need people in the space that really understand it, and we see ourselves as sort of complementary to this. We don't
Mm.
invest directly in the music making process, but we invest in the music as a catalyst for nightlife. So the idea
Mm.
of what are the music startups that are bringing people together socially, and that's what we
Mm.
actually invest in.
Mm. You have two investments in the music space right now that are directly music, and obviously music would be a part of probably any startup you have. But for those two investments, could you dissect for me, what do they do?
Sure. We are invested in Unheard, which is a UK-based startup made by the brilliant Alex Breeze. And the startup is basically your music marketing platform in a digital app. So they have both scalable and bespoke services that they do. You're able to really target who and analyze who would listen to your music and be able to promote your music in many different ways, either through targeted ads or playlisting. It's a way to help you as an artist go viral with the music that you're making. And
Mm.
what's incredible is that Alex truly, truly believes in the artists that he has there, and he works so hand in hand with a lot of them that he has on there that I think it's a one of a kind in the space for sure. The second one is Soundbox, and Soundbox is a Danish app. It's been around for almost 10 years. You should know um,
Right.
as a Dane. And yeah, also the founder, Jasper, is extremely committed to the work that he's done. And you can tell he brings all the fun and the play into Soundbox. And the idea is it's a really cool speaker that brings the party anywhere. It democratizes the party, it democratizes your um, social experience. And I was actually living in Kenya for a little bit before I joined Best Nights VC. And that's the first time I heard of Soundbox, because we were building festivals and parties in places that were really hard to get electricity, and we were connecting sound boxes together and charging the batteries with solar power, and building these incredible experiences. So I'm very proud of these two companies.
Amazing. I don't know Jesper myself, but I do know Sandbox very well, and we just recently had dinner with Alex together. So he's a brilliant founder. And I'm gonna say something. Alex is a brilliant founder, but I believe without offending anyone, I think they're few and far between. In music tech.
Hmm.
Uh, and is that something you see as well? Like that it's really difficult finding that traditional tech founder with that hunger and approach that Alex might have?
Oh, definitely. It's really hard, and this is why when we find it, even if it's not polished or perfected, we still want to nourish it. So
Mm.
there's definitely been founders that have something really cool, but they're still lacking this, yeah, this understanding, and we'll try to have patience and try to work with them on it, just because uh, these things are so these types of founders, I think, are quite rare for sure.
Mm.
And I think also we're looking culturally. I mean, we're investing in everywhere at this point. So we can invest in 150 countries because Jägermeister is based in 150 countries. Most of our investments are in Europe and the US. We just made our first investment in Africa. We're quite keen on the emerging markets, which is also quite interesting. And I think that this is where we're going to start directing a lot of our energy, is the, not
Mm.
this European mindset always, but also how can we see where all the trends are for nightlife, which is not just happening in Europe. And I think
Mm.
when we do say we're looking for this, who are the founders of the future. It doesn't have to be, oh man, I'm gonna offend someone here, but it doesn't have to be, that typical person walking around in a Patagonia vest or gone to this school or this thing. And I think that's what's really important, because also that's how I also know the industry, especially coming um, from the Israeli side of things, is that, a founder can be anyone. A founder can have all sorts of experiences, and that's really important to building up the narratives and the drive that
Mm.
they have.
Mm. I I think that's really interesting. Let's stay a bit with the founder side. I'm gonna just refer to a article I read on Music Business Worldwide with one of my close friends, Vicky Nauman, and she brought up this concept of industry market fit, which I thought was a brilliant formulation on something very specific. So every founder would know the concepts of product market fit, and most founders would also very well understand what investor market fit would mean. But then there's also the concept of industry market fit. And what I think is really interesting when it comes to founder profiles um, with both background but also personality is that the combination of those three, I think it goes for any industry, but I think maybe in particular some creative industries that has a very strong inherent culture aspect to it that also plays into play. Um, is that you need to know how to speak to investors, you need to know to speak how to customers, but then you also need to know how to speak to the industry. And the
Bilingual.
industry, yeah, a- and the industry, many times can be almost the opposite of like investor market fit, for example. Um, like there's not a lot of common denominators, and you almost a founder need to be able to switch between personalities in order to navigate that specific thing. Does that
Oh,
ring a
yes.
bell? Like, did
Yeah, too, I feel seen. Yes, because also I feel this as, someone in my role as well, and I get that from the founder role, but also at Best Nights VC, because, I'm one way talking to the corporate side of things. I'm another person talking to the artists and creatives about what we do and what venture capital is, and then I'm someone else talking, to the founders. And so you have to be sort of these split personalities and know how to translate different mindsets. And so, a big
Mm,
part of my role is being the liaison between the portfolio companies as well as what we're doing inside of Jägermeister. So I have a holistic view at Jägermeister, and I have a holistic view of the startups and trying to find all the win-win opportunities. But
mm,
I constantly find myself translating between the two sides about what they're trying to say to each other. So this is
mm.
very important that you can be a chameleon in this industry.
Yeah, and I think beyond the market fits of those three: product market fit, investor market fit, and industry market fit, I think um, the domain expertise and how real it actually is that you have your foundation in each of those are quite important. We consult a good deal of companies, and I never really mentioned any names, but we had one particular company we talked a lot with that is within a very non-musical space within finance, and they're telling a very strong music story. But at the end of the day, it's clear that you guys don't come from music. Like it's so like if you don't nail all three, like sticks to the ones you know. And
Yeah.
and and I think oftentimes the best case if you do nail all three. And maybe that's where founders such as Alex, maybe stand strong. He doesn't come from traditional finance background, but what he is, he's a very strong founder and an investor perspective. If that makes sense, like that,
Yes.
there's certain criteria you would be looking for where he would score very high from an investor perspective, but then also his music industry experience really makes him. I call him an industry darling, which I believe he is. And then
I'm yeah.
and then product market fit, like, he knows what he's talking about, like, this is not just some new thing, like, he has all those 3 elements, and I'm wondering that might be the things that people miss out on besides the concept of market fit, but also the founder fit within those 3 elements. Does that make sense?
It's a very good point, actually, and, yeah, there I think, of course, a mix of experiences, make, the product and make, the story you're trying to tell, but if you have no passion or no narrative towards what you're trying to solve, then yeah, it's not going to work.
Mm. Yeah, and actually, in all honesty, that's what I'm struggling with. So I believe I would by now have a really fairly good investor market fit when it comes to understanding the lingo, how to approach, how to talk about what you do, and I would have I would say very strong industry market fit. But I struggle with product market fit, and not just for the case that I'm more of an inventor type. So
Right.
like never really have the end user in mind that much because I don't really care. So, oftentimes, if I could just create stuff, invent stuff within commercial perspective, I would be happy, and I'm happy. Also, some of the things we don't make money on, and I'm fine. I love this. But again, that's not how startups just should work, right? So that's my
Investor's
biggest
worst
struggle.
nightmare.
Sorry, what did you say?
An investor's worst nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know, and that's my issue, and so actually, because being very aware of these three things, that's what I'm working on. I'm trying to be much more bullish on having the end consumer in mind. Because at the end of the day, I'm running a business. I have plenty of employees all around the world that are working on different things, and I need to pay salary each month, and uh, I have my own kids to take care of. So I think I'm trying to live by what I just said and say, okay, I need to. I maybe have a bit more of an untraditional thing I'm lacking, but that's what I'm working on. Um, but when it comes to sort of product market fit in music. Let's just get there because a lot of founders, as I see it, has a very sentimental approach to building startups in music. Like,
Oh, yeah.
how do you see that?
Yeah, I think, Slush that we were talking about was actually a very good example of this because, when you're talking a lot of the founders that I talked to, I felt like, were so emotional, let's say, about what they were building that they weren't seeing the challenges. And as an
Yep.
investor, I'm gonna, of course, challenge, not just an investor, sorry, also in my experience, both in startups and also music, I'm gonna challenge a lot of, the potential red flags that I see when it comes to anything. But a good founder, and we talked about this before, uh, as a founder that's going to succeed for sure is someone that's also willing to learn, willing to listen, not take everything that the investors say and say, "Okay, I'm gonna change everything," because you need backbone, of course, and you need to know when you're right versus the other person. But at the same time, what every founder doesn't realize is that as an investor, we're seeing, you know, like hundreds of companies. We're screening hundreds of companies all the time. And so someone will come to me and say, "We are revolutionizing this." And I've seen 20 companies that are basically doing the same thing. And so if you can't tell me how you are different in a non-emotional, in a factual way, not just with adjectives, but give me the facts, give me something that I can either prove right or wrong, not, is an opinion, um, then it's definitely going to be a bit of a red flag or, almost like exhaust us as investors. So,
Mm.
um, I saw this a bit, recently at the different. I've been to so many conferences in the last couple months because of different speaking engagements of things like this, and um, I what I was really inspired by, actually more than the startups that I met. Oh God, I'm gonna get in so much trouble, but more than the startups I met were the investors I met. Are actually, for the first time in a long time, felt like I was meeting investors who were really, had that mindset that I was looking for a very long time, that also saw, the emotional, but still clear sides of what music brings, and music is an emotional narrative. It's not, you do need a good business model and you need all of these things, but the drive is so much different than other tech, and we were talking about it a bit at the panel that we did at Slush, and, it's a very different driver, and so I was very impressed to see how many more investors, that actually are out there that are interested and feeling in the same way, because this also means that, this like-mindedness will lead to better investments, joining up
Mm.
together, better syndicates. And even now, I left so inspired. I'm talking to different people and say, hey, who are the investors doing this or that? And in general, we talk to so many investors at Best Nights VC on a daily basis anyway, but looking even more specifically to very certain topics or things that even I'm not looking at just to know who they are so I can introduce them to founders. And I think building up this industry in a better way because it's slow, but it's happening.
Mm. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well, which is quite interesting. Like, what I haven't figured out yet is to what end. You know, I I'm trying to study as much as I can, like the upsides for investors in this space. And
Mhm.
actually, when I talk with investors myself, from this world, especially in Europe, it doesn't seem to be a clear answer there. Like, I've also been. Not many people know this, but I'm finishing up my second master's now, which I should have done. It's too busy on the side of my full-time job.
When do you have time for this? Honestly.
I don't know. I work very effectively. Anyways, so I'm focusing pretty much 2 years on music tech financing.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of work in this space, and what I can conclude so far is no one has numbers. And the people who might have numbers just aren't public about it. And I've now gotten access to some sort of numbers that I need to consolidate. But after studying 2 years, both in academics, and just also as a professional, I can't really see the metrics. I can sense that there's certain um, attractive things about music tech investment, but there's no specific proof points I can point to from a tangible source. Um, my
Well, this
question
is not
is,
everything is venture cases, and I discuss this
you know,
all the time, with other people in the scene, and this is we're sort of at this weird place that I think education needs to be more prominent and not just, "Oh, and we can't get investment because investors don't get us," or this or that. It's actually there needs to be something built up about how or real education in the space for what actually warrants an investment. You know,
mm,
there's There's just stuff that's, not super scalable, but really good businesses, and that definitely doesn't need, traditional VCs as they stand, maybe an angel if it makes sense, but not
mm,
traditional VCs. But what does it actually be to be a scalable business, to warrant that,
mm,
that actual venture capital? What is it? And this is something, we look at all the time at Best Nights VC. Is this a VC case, or is this just a good business, or is this
mm,
just that doesn't that doesn't need this. And then we can partner with them in some way and we can mentor them. And that's where I think it takes everyone in the space to sort of
mm.
think about it this way and not just write off these companies, but say, hey, you're a really cool business. Let's talk about partnership. Let's talk about what else could help you, but it's not investment.
Yeah. And what's really striking is, of the VCs in Europe that are outspoken about music, there's around 5 or 6. Uh, and, I wouldn't have the numbers on other industries, but I'm pretty sure that must be one of the lowest numbers of any industry in Europe when it comes to VC representation. Um, and then that just speaks to, it's a tiny bit different from music. And, coming back to education, the traditional founder education, both academically or accelerators or self-studied. There's a lot of rules and podcasts to talk about all this kind of stuff, and I've been looking up as much as I can, and the truth is like a lot of it is really good learnings, but it's just not applicable directly.
Mhm.
Um, because for example in VC, one of the most important parameters you can dissect yourself is obviously what you believe a company's potential is. And when you see from a portfolio standpoint, you need to have fairly big potentials on market share and revenue and acquisition potential in order for it to make music an interesting investment. Could you dissect for me what does that actually mean? So when it comes to potential, what does that mean for music, and why might it not be hitting the mark?
Well, it's also different for us at Best Nights VC than I could say for other traditional investors, and probably the reason why that there are a few. So let's start with with us. our our metrics, our framework is quite different because we are a corporate venture capital fund. Our focus is also on the social impact and not just financial return. So
Mm.
that is an important part, but are the way we view everything, our whole framework is entirely different than traditional or other venture capital firms. Um, and I think as a whole, I mean, without something entirely negative, because this is still a very positive industry, it's still very broken. The way we consume music, the way it's distributed. We touched upon this earlier, but it's extremely broken. So investment for band-aids that sort of fix even part of the problem, it's not such an attractive case, and that's why it's still an industry that's really, really small. I mean, I think, let's take, for example, the company that came out from DVS1, a Slice. This one, you remember this? Great idea, hyped up. In the end, adoption is still quite slow, and DJs themselves, they make very little money, yet they're expected to give some of it back to the producer. So you're looking at something that's so broken, yet who gets blamed for the downfall of a Slice? It's the DJs that are blamed because they didn't want to give their fees back to the producer when they're barely making, enough for themselves in general. So maybe we
Mm.
should go to the source of the problem, like we said
Mm.
before, how coffee's made and how all of this is done and who is expected to pay for what. It's the same thing with music. The whole system is entirely broken. And I think this is what we're starting to do on a very tiny level, is start to pick apart these pieces and try to fix them. And I don't think we can expect it to happen overnight, but this is why we're starting to see more and more music tech. We're starting to see more and more investors in it. It's still rather slow and really small, but this is why it's not scaling to that level yet, because there's still too many problems to sort of
Mm.
dissect and fix.
So, what do you believe is going to be the most important thing startups can fix in music to make it more attractive, and how long time do you think that's going to take?
I will quote you on this.
Oh, really?
I'm going to quote you. Fix the boring problem, not the exciting one. This is a quote from you that I really like, but it's kind of true. Think about the most basic problems here and don't try to solve everything. And think about what can make the that best impact. But in terms of timing, ooh, I don't know. I think we're gonna see the next 5 to 10 years taking a huge hit, but also a really exciting time with how AI affects everything. And then once this sort of regulates or self-regulates or gets to a very interesting point, then only then I think we'll see a lot of this scale
Mm.
a lot further ahead. But I think it's going to take several years for sure.
Mm.
I see that
I
as a positive outlook, by the way.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I have this. So when I started out Amplitude Ventures, which I lead now, we started 4 years ago in a month or two, and I had a very ambitious plan of how to sort of build this company, and I think I said, exit in 7 years, like 4 years ago. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Um, so a few years from now, but I have said something new, which I actually believe in. And that there's a few reasons. Last year I decided it's going to be 15 years from now. Um, and as a startup, that's not a great thing to say. Obviously, I have a few nuances to that, but sort of our model over time is portfolio ownership. So very much like an investor, we just are from the builder's perspective. And I honestly think that in 14 years from now, I'm saying 14 years because I said 15 years 1 year ago. Um, it's going to take the time for us to be operating as a market leader in an ecosystem that works within startups and music.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, if there's any point of buying whatever we've built, it needs to fit into an ecosystem of things that works. It cannot just live by its own. And I think it's going to take a long time to make it more attractive to be in this space. But then again, on the flip side, I have several friends who've sold companies in this space or who have had acquisitions offers in this space. and it's been quite amazing. But they're all under NDAs. They're not even allowed to tell me, but I'll be quiet. And that's also the sad part because this is not getting out there, so it doesn't really inspire the investors. You can't really use it in academics. You can't really showcase the other numbers. So I think it's just problematic because the chicken and the egg scenario, like one of my angles is like, okay, if one of the solution could be being transparent about what actually worked. How much was the investment? When was it? At what stage? When was it sold? At what number? What did the founders get? What did the investors get? So like an actual dissection of the whole flow of investment to acquisition, but also from investment to fail. Like
This
I
is long
think
term.
that's long term, but and I think that's
Yeah.
that's going to be one of the pieces because you as a VC might have a clearer sense than most of what that is. But again, it's not consolidated information. Um, and it's just one out of, I don't know, 10, 15 major issues that could over time be addressed to make it a better place to get investments and better place to be acquired. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and, I mean, in general, even at Best Nights VC, when we invest, we're always thinking about what is of typical investors, we're always thinking, what is the exit strategy at the end? And so it's not something
Yeah.
that we overlook. Um, but I think also investing in music tech also has the same sort of outlook that I think about when it comes to the issues as a whole in the let's at least in the European investment sector. So um, I think we have to stop looking at early stage investments as trying to find the least amount of risk. We're not bankers here. We are
Mm.
investors. The whole
Good.
idea is to place a lot of bets and to mentor and to scale up these relationships, nurture them, and try to build as much of the ecosystem as we possibly can without oversaturating it. And it's not always what we see here. We see a very banker focused approach a lot of time when it comes to investors. Not
Yeah.
I'm not speaking directly about the music tech space because it's definitely less in the music tech space for sure than other sectors. But I think the reason people got into this music side in the first place, especially from the VC side, and most of who we know, they have sort of that music side as well, so they know what it takes, and they're in it, because of it's their heart and soul as well. And more we're starting to see people going, maybe there's some good ideas there, or you know,
Yeah.
we're seeing some of these acquisitions, and we're seeing things, and like even though they're few and far in between, everyone wants to be that person who's on one,
Mhm.
so or wants to
Mhm.
be that VC that has done that. So
Yeah.
it's not the most obvious industry. It's definitely a way, way, way more difficult one to crack. Um, that's why we focus on just one piece of it as far as our investment thesis goes. But um, the
Mm.
trends sort of speak for itself when it comes to different sides of it. We saw what
Mm.
happened during the pandemic when it comes to music tech as a whole, and I think that this also just shows where that this is going and what also are the major blockers that are getting in the way. And like we touched upon before, the more we sort of commodify this as content and devaluing it, uh, this is one of the major blockers that we have to solve.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm
That
I'm
needs to
writing a few articles about this, and I hope to post them on LinkedIn soon because you got to start somewhere of sort of dissecting it. So I've written 3 articles on music tech financing so far. Uh, one of the things that I'm really practically looking into is what you mentioned, the amount of tickets. You didn't say that directly, but he basically said that, you know, that there needs to be several investments in order to really understand it. And I
Mhm.
had a talk with Thierry from Media Deals, who's also a co-founder of Music Tech Europe, and he said something really interesting. Is um, when he talk, I think that was Thierry. Anyways, when he talked with VCs who've had previous successful music tech investments, and they're asked, why is this not something you're pursuing in general? They say, well, we invested because we like the founders, but it's not a repeatable thing for us. Like
Mhm.
the market in itself is maybe not that interesting. And even if it was, like the access to shared investor knowledge on what to look for and how to validate stuff. Things that are just too limited. So it's
I
not like, if you go new energy, ESG, medical, they would see hundreds of companies, and you would have investor specialists that would know this really well. But like within music, it's the most of the metrics you can look at. Okay, do they have good financial projections? Is the market like fine enough? Do they have
Mhm.
traction? Is the founder team great? But the whole domain expertise that really gives that due diligence confidence is just really hard to access. And
Absolutely.
and what he pointed out, and it might be someone else, but I think it was actually Thierry, but was
Mhm.
that because it doesn't happen at scale, there's not enough tickets, there's not enough investments. Like also within like consolidated environments, that knowledge transfer is just really struggling.
Yeah.
So music might be attractive, but how can you repeat it? Well, you can repeat it through quantity. But if you don't have the knowledge, you can't risk that, because there's other places where
Yeah.
the potential would be higher and the risk would be lower because of the domain expertise that's behind the investments. Does that
Yes.
make sense? Um,
Completely. 100%.
so
I would agree.
I'm not announcing on the podcast because it's still a project that works. It's something that right now has a relative amount of momentum. Is we're trying to set up a syndicate of successful founders that have exited the music industry in order to really focus on a vehicle with having a lot of small tickets. So that's sort of what we hope to set up next year. If we won't, people will
I have
know
some
by the
ideas around
podcast.
that we can talk
Yeah.
about.
Um, and I think that could be really interesting to see, because based on our research, that is one of the most evident reasons why there's not a lot of success in music tech investments, is because you just need to treat it like any other industry. There needs to be multiple tickets. You can't just make one bet and based on
Yes.
that make a
Yes.
decision that doesn't mean anything. Um,
I agree. We
yeah,
need to see multiple bets. We need to see more deal flow. We need to see more sharing. Um, Super important.
yeah. So
And that's
we
a lot
we
of what
probably
we're
gave,
doing at SBC. Like we
yeah.
are sharing deal flow regularly. We're talking to as many investors as we possibly can. We're talking to also investors that maybe overlap with a topic that's not exactly music. It could be, let's say, gaming or entertainment that sometimes overlaps with a company that we're talking to. So, as much as we can, try to find all of the stuff that we all share. I think it's super important for the industry.
Mm. There's one concept that, in connection with the coffee example and cafe, with the coffee bean. Again, I'm just referring to my business partner Taj. uh, is something that we like to use, and it's not completely correct, but I like these simplified statements, is that music sells anything but music. And depending on who I mention it for, I get a lot of pushback or some resonance. But the whole concept is, as of now, and probably also in the foreseeable future, in most cases, music needs to exist in the context of other income sources as well. Like you need to
Mhm.
count in other industries, other products, other synergies than just music itself. And
Yes.
that's basically what you're preaching at Best Nights VC, at least your focus. Could you dissect for me what that might mean, like for startups? Like what startups might not be utilizing that fully?
Community, I think, is the biggest aspect of it. And community is one of the biggest things that that we're looking at. And when it comes to music, it's also one of the main reasons that I love music so much. It's a community that brings together of sharing this same ideal about what you're listening to and what you're hearing. And I think fan engagement in itself is a topic that no one has really cornered the market on. This is a topic that we definitely look at quite often, and it's something that I see a lot in terms of what people are trying to build, but haven't seen anyone quite nail it yet. But it's still quite
Mm.
early, so
Uh,
I think the market is open here. Um, yeah, as a whole, I think everyone says that tech is there to scale everything, but not everyone is solving the right problem with tech, and I think that itself could be something different that people focus on. And for sure, when it comes to utilizing, what is not, I guess, being utilized, it's everything around the music, everything that it's a catalyst for. So your community that we talked about, but what is the music being used for in general? Is it, a running club? Is it a dating social event that people are getting together? Is it your best night at let's say you're traveling to Brazil and you're going to Carnival, and you're experiencing culture through an event? Is it a festival that you're going to so you can see your favorite artist and be with your friends? So, um, from Best Nights VC's perspective, this is why music is the catalyst, and we're looking at all the things surrounding music that people are sharing together, and not just specifically the music itself. And so, this is why when we talk to other music tech investors who are invested in really the music making side of it is a very different outlook. Music making and music distribution. It's a very different outlook than what we are looking at Best Nights VC. And I think when you're really, really in the sector, you're seeing the really nitty gritty problems from the other side of the perspective, and that is, everything is so democratized now. It's so broken that it's hard to make that scalable. And I mean, myself as a DJ and still playing, regularly and making music, it's wonderful, and I still consider this a professional part of my life. But it's so democratized now that even though I play vinyl and do all these things, it's not something I could personally live from unless like you're hustling nonstop. So uh, we're I think that there's people that are really trying to live from music and making music. This is a huge problem that people are trying to solve on the tech startup side of things, and that's not really there yet. And I think to understand where these problems come from will be the next step to actually being able to solve them rather than just trying to put in this is a platform solution that connects, this side with this side. These are, it's great. It's a great start. And this is how every industry needs to start, but it's not
Mm.
what's going to scale
Hmm.
yet.
So you've now been in the investor space within music for some years. Um, I'm very curious to hear. Uh, do you believe there's investors? Because I've been provoking a few investors with an article I wrote where I said there's no such thing as music investors, and I think that's partially true and mostly true. But what I'm really encouraged by this talk today is I think you've multiple times talked about deal flow
Mhm.
and sharing and hearing investors at conferences speak. Could you, for the listeners and for me, try to give a guess on how many? I know it's a hard question. How many people and companies out there that are actually looking for music tech investment in Europe, and how high of a quality investors are there? Like, is there actually an environment? Is it coming? Is it current? Can you help me understand that?
I think very specific, straight music production, music distribution tech is still very small numbers. And it's definitely not at the place where we'd say, "Oh, yeah, that's the deal flow that we're getting the most traction on when it comes to, co-investments or things like this." But and it's also not what we're bullish about looking at. But when it comes to how music is a catalyst and sharing that, through deal flow and what that touches upon, where it strikes a chord, no pun intended, with other investors, that's something we're seeing a lot of traction on. So when we can connect music to another area or another space, that is definitely easier for adoption, hands down.
So you would say that the space where music is a part of something else, there is investors.
Correct. But anything where it's like when we divide just the very strictly music tech into production and distribution, this is still very, very small. But
Mm,
on the positive side, I mean, it's so much bigger than it was, let's say, even 10 years ago when, I was
mm.
first going to mentor and speak at Sonar Plus D and meeting other people in the space. And you really had to be like this. Are there any investors? And now, there's a lot of people claiming to be investors that maybe they're not still not doing it, but it's still the numbers have changed completely in the last 10 years. So
Mm.
it's slower to catch on, but it's happening.
Yeah, one of the theses
Mm.
I have in this space, also when I talk with startups, is that it's really hard and probably not a good idea to have a model that's focusing on B2C to artists or B2C to creators, where your audience is artists or creators. I know Alex and Unheard does that, but they do it particularly well. But I would also say they're an exception out of many, many cases where that actually has potential. And because when you operate on a traditional B2C methodology, to a market that is so incredibly small, with very little um, power to pay, um, it's hard to see from a practical, theoretical investor level how that's ever going to make money. It's going to make sense, the sacrifice it takes to be a founder, beyond whatever sentimental upside you might have. Does it
Sure.
make sense? Yeah, and I think that's what you
Long
touch
term,
upon
you're
as well,
looking
right?
for the unicorns, but short term, as you're building the industry, you're this is not what I see most people should be looking for. You have to build up the industry, but this is still not, it's not a nonprofit. It's not a charity thing. Everyone needs to
Yeah.
be entrepreneurial and thinking ahead, but it's still
Mm.
everything in stages.
Yeah, and I think one really important thing to say is that things only really change when they sustain over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So whatever initiative that might be that can exist for a few years based on pure love and goodwill, it most likely won't make a dent either.
Mhm.
So it is the what sometimes for founders, especially if are very idealistic, might seem like a capitalistic compromise. In reality, that's the change that must happen in order to take that incremental step, and it might not be more than that. Like, yeah, I think people um, shouldn't be too hopeful how much change they can make. Like, just being real.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Like we said,
it
it's still really broken, and we need to think about what are the root causes
Yeah.
rather than just band-aids popping up all over the place. So I think this is where the game changers will really happen,
Mm.
is when the root causes are really dissected.
Andrea, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and
We could do this
um,
all day.
yeah, we could. That's also the issue because we shouldn't. We
Let us
actually
know what's for the listeners.
I was talking about my favorite podcast right now being Lex Friedman, and some of his newest episodes was like 5 hours long, and I'm like, this guy, he's amazing because I know he can retain it. But again, that's also the change over time. The music industry needs to become there needs to become more people listening to this kind of stuff, even though there's actually a lot of people listening to Sound Connection. So thank you very much. But Andrea, it's been a pleasure, and I think. Um, for me, it's so refreshing to having a person in Europe that's in investment in this space that understands music so deeply. And I think that the contribution you're going to make in the future with being a voice in this space is going to matter because having hardcore business people in music investment is so key. But there are so many gaps to be bridged, and I believe your voice can be a part of that. So thank you so much for sharing your experience here in the podcast, and I loved it.
Thanks for the invite. It's always so good to talk to you, and happy to do it on camera, off camera, anytime. I think the more we keep getting together and talking about this, the more changes can be made. And of course, anyone who's listening to this and you think you have an idea, go to our website, send in your pitch deck through our funnel. I promise you, we screen everything. But also, do some research, know what we invest in. Don't just pitch because you think you do something in music, but pitch because you think you fit with the thesis, and that's what every investor wants to see. So we're rooting
Mm.
for all of you.
Great, Indra. We'll talk soon.